For many of us, finding a way to store your bike can be a challenge. Not just the aspect of keeping your bike out of harm's way, but also conserving space in your garage or shed. Over the last several years, I've dealt with this challenge firsthand and understand the frustration of trying to find the best and most practical way to store your beloved rigs. Simply leaning your bike against a wall won't work long term, and some of the storage solutions available online can have quite the build of stomach. In this video, we're talking about 5 DIY bike storage solutions made with materials that you likely have laying around your house and the pros and cons behind each option. The first on our list is probably the most used method and easiest to set up. All you really need is a rubberized hook and a way to drill a hole. But to keep your wall looking nice and have multiple options, a piece of 2x4 and a few screws will make this job a lot easier. Hanging your bike vertically on a wall with one of these hooks is a super cheap, super effective way to safely store your bike in any area. I used this method in the first iteration of the shred shed because I needed a way to store as much as I possibly could into an 8x10 foot shed. When you mount the hook directly to a wall, you're punching a pretty big hole into a wall should you ever want to move where you store your bike. Plus, it's a good idea to hit a stud, which is why I prefer to mount a hook to a 2x4 and attach that to the wall. Mounting the hook to a 2x4 allows you to put those massive holes into something that can easily be removed. Whether you expand on your bike collection, change up your bike cave, or just want to move where your bike lives, it's nice to not be left with half-inch holes all over the place. The 2x4 can always be moved, but it also gives you more mounting options. Without it, where you put your bike is dependent on where you can find a stud. When you're working with limited space, every inch counts when it comes to packing those bikes into a confined space. Most studs are 16 inches apart, but you can comfortably store your bike 12 inches apart from each other, giving you an extra bike stored for every 4 feet of space. The pros to this storage option is that it's very cheap, can fit multiple bikes into a tight area, and has a very small footprint. I fit 3 bikes into just a couple feet of wall space, and they stick out less than 4 feet from the wall. Cons are that you really need to have the wall space, which can be hard to come by in a shed or a garage. Also note that no matter how nice of a hook you get, the rubber will wear off. You're then left with a hard piece of steel rubbing on your precious hoops. It can also be hard to position your bike just right when lifting it into place, where you run the risk of damaging your spokes and nipples if you're not careful. And the last thing you want is damaged nipples. Moving on from damaged nipples is a way to take advantage of 3-dimensional space and get your bikes up on the ceiling. Using the same materials as the last method, you could take advantage of otherwise wasted space, whether it be above a workbench, pile of crap in the corner, or just an open area you have in the garage. You can get your bikes up and out of the way for just a few bucks. You really want to make sure you hit a joist here, especially if your ceiling is drywalled. But apart from that, you'll need the same materials as the last option, but with an additional hook per bike. Make sure to choose a location that will clear any doors, vehicles, and headspace. The biggest pro to this option is that it really doesn't have a footprint. Bikes are a bulky thing to store, and most spaces just don't have the ground space. But most ceilings are empty outside of a couple lights and maybe a garage door motor. When I was a kid, we had about 20 bikes hanging from the ceiling between BMX bikes, mountain bikes, race bikes, and pit bikes. Those would take up an entire garage if stored on the ground. This allows you to free up ground and wall space, all while still only costing a couple bucks per bike. You have the same troubles that come with using these hooks as the previous method, but you almost need taller ceilings to go this route. I have 9-foot ceilings in most of my garage, meaning that I can't just hang my bike wherever I want. I would need to worry about where my vehicles are parked, where I walk, and if the garage door is in the way or not. It can also be awkward to lift your bike up over your head, but either way, it's a great option. Moving on, this next option can probably be built with scrap pieces of wood you have laying around your house. In an older video, we built a bike stand for 3 bikes. This build was based around solving a space problem in every direction. Not only were the walls too short to hang a bike vertically, but the shed had a small enough footprint where we didn't want the bikes protruding into the middle of the floor. To solve this, we built a rack at a 45-degree angle, which allowed us to store the bikes even closer together because the handlebars would be staggered. If floor space isn't a problem for you, this is a cheap and easy way to build a bike rack. With just 4 sections of 2x4 and an additional 2 pieces for each bike, you can throw together a rack in just a couple minutes. It can be built so the bikes are square to the wall or angled like the rack that I built. An additional benefit to this rack is that the more bikes you add, the sturdier the rack becomes. The downside, however, is that you need to be cautious of your derailleur. With the longer cages that come on 11 and 12 speed drivetrains, the bottom of the cage can actually rest on the support if in the easier gear when storing. If leaning the wrong way, the derailleur acts as a kickstand and can potentially damage a pretty expensive component. Something else to look out for is that the side supports tend to loosen up over time from loading and unloading your bikes. Your bike has quite a bit of leverage leaning on these smaller supports, which can come loose over time. Moving on to arguably the best and most professional looking option is a way to mount your bike on a wall in a way that showcases your rig in all of its beauty. They make fancy bike hooks and trays to display your bike this way, but all you really need is a piece of 2x4 and a section of dowel. You can buy pieces of dowel at the hardware store, or you can spend $300 on a crib and use the extra parts that are left over after assembly. Drill a hole in the 2x4 so the dowel fits snugly. This is what's going to hook onto your bike and keep it standing. For wheel supports, you can either leave them resting on the ground or add sections of 2x4 to the wall. Each bike will measure differently, but find out how high your pedal will measure above the bottom of your wheels when angled away from the wall. For this step, make sure the pedal closest to the wall is in the 12 o'clock position. You want the piece that hooks onto your pedal to be decently strong, but this is only preventing your bike from tipping over. All of your bike's weight will be supported by whatever the wheels are resting on. Not only does this mounting option make your home shop look professional by showcasing your trusty steed, but it basically uses no material at all, and it's a cheap option whether you choose to DIY or not. You can pick up tire trays and mounting hooks on Amazon for like $20 per bike, and you don't even have to buy a crib for the spare parts. A big downside to this option is that it's not good for conserving space. Sure, you can stack a few bikes on top of each other, but with other options, you can fit 5 or even 6 bikes in the space that just 2 bikes take up with this option. Plus, you really need the wall space. Most sheds aren't tall enough to accommodate more than 1 bike vertically, and 1/4 the walls in a garage really can't be used anyways. Moving on to our last storage option is a way to take your bike rack storage to the next level. This option's for those who are looking for a fun DIY project that serves a practical use, saves space, and makes unloading your bike a bit easier. April Wilkerson has a video where she builds a bike rack that swivels. You can kinda do this with just the hook method that we discussed earlier, but with her option, you don't run the risk of damaging your rims. It's purpose built, it is just a sweet idea. I have a link to her video down in the description, but in short, she explains how to build this rack custom fit to your bike, which allows you to swing it out of the way if it's in a high traffic area, or if you have multiple bikes hung next to each other. This option is great for those who are looking for a fun DIY project and prefer something that's more functional rather than just getting the job done. While this is probably the most time-consuming DIY method on the list, you also need to have more tools handy to build this project, and you'll likely need to make a trip to the hardware store to get everything you need. Let me know down in the comments which method you found to be most useful, and which one you think is the most ridiculous. Each has its own set of problems it's solving, and not all of these will work best for you. It comes down to the space you have available and how much effort you're willing to put in order to keep your space tidy and your bike safe. And if you like this video and you want to see more just like it, make sure that you're subscribed.